are your values really what you think they are? I want to present you with a question now. Now this is a question that I want you to actually ask yourself. And that is, what do you value most in life? Now, some of us are going to be able to answer that on the fly. We know on the tip of our tongue what our primary value is, or what our values are. Some of us might need to think for a few seconds, maybe for a minute or two. It's not a simple question, and it makes sense that we might need to take a minute or two to reflect and think, really, what are our values? What do we value most in life? There may be one thing that is our number one value. There may be, 2 or 3. The answer's not 12 things. If the answer's 10 or 12 things, we need to drill down, because out of 10 or 12 things, there are going to be 1 or 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5, maybe things that we really value above all else. But 1, 2, maybe 3. What is or are our top values? What are our values? And you can pause and take a minute to think about that if you want, but really ask yourself that. What do you value most in life? And once you've thought about that, I want to ask a second question. Now, I want to give a little bit of an introduction, or to lay some groundwork before I ask this question. And what I'm about to say is, I would describe it as being obviously obvious. But despite how obvious it is, painfully obvious, I'm going to say it anyway. And the reason I'm going to say this anyway is because we have, protective mechanisms, the same way we have, protective systems in our DNA and in our physiology. We have protective mechanisms in our mind, in our subconscious, that are there to, protect us from things that would be too much, things that would hurt us, maybe things that would just, overwhelm us and we wouldn't be able to handle. So sometimes if there's something that would just be too confronting, too much to address or to think about, either we maybe just refuse to think about it. Sometimes what we do is we tell ourselves we've thought about it. We said, yeah, I thought about that, but without really thinking about it. We sort of, very superficially think about it, if at all, and tell ourselves that we've thought about it, but without really thinking about it. And sometimes that's necessary, because there are some things that really would be too much. That's why denial is a part of human nature. Sometimes it's necessary. But sometimes there are things that would not be, supremely comfortable to think about, things that would be confronting and maybe substantially uncomfortable, but things that would also be very, very valuable and helpful for us to address directly, to confront, to really think about and ask ourselves and to process. And, sometimes those things, as uncomfortable as they are, and as much as we want to resist thinking about them, sometimes the value and the growth we can achieve as a result of thinking about them, sometimes it can be really life-changing. And, and the value and the benefit of confronting them far outweighs the discomfort. So, and I think this can be the case about the question that I'm about to ask, which is why I'm giving this introduction. So, as painfully obvious as it is, as obviously obvious as it is, I want to just point out, so that, we're all aware of this, our conscious minds are aware of this. You're not going to have to answer this question verbally. I'm going to ask a question, and I really do want you to think about it honestly. But you're thinking about this in your head. No one is going to hear your thoughts. You're not going to respond to me. You're not going to respond to anyone else. So it's safe. It's safe for you to actually confront this question, to think about this honestly and ask yourself honestly, and take the time to, to confront it and think about it, because no one else is going to know. So, and again, you don't need me to tell you that you're not going to answer this and no one's going to hear your thoughts, but I want to just point it out, to make it as clear as possible that, we're all safe here to take the time to actually ask ourselves this question seriously and honestly, and to take the time to think about it. And that question is, if someone else would observe your life for an hour, a day, a week, and then I would go and ask this other person, based on their observation of how you live your life, what they think your values are. Based on the way they see you behave, what do they perceive as being valuable to you? What do they think your values are? And the question is, would they give the same answer that you gave to the first question, right? Would someone who observes the way that we behave accurately predict what our values are? Now, sometimes, for some of us, the answer might be yes. I would speculate that it's going to be no to some degree for all of us. For some of us, it's like, yeah, not so much. Very clearly obvious. It's a no-brainer. For some of us, it might be, yeah, mostly yes, honestly. For some of us, it might seem like it's, like very much. Again, I'm going to speculate that for all of us, if we dig deep enough, we'll find some discrepancies. I'm giving us the benefit of the doubt to assume that we'll have to dig deep to find discrepancies, but I would go out on a limb and speculate that there are some discrepancies between our behavior and, what we report as being our values, that all of us are going to have some discrepancies. And therefore, if someone was to observe our behavior and then if we'd ask them to, to tell us what they think our values are, what they report as being their estimate of our values based on our behavior might be somewhat different, at least, to what we report as being our values. Now, and there can be different reasons for that. Sometimes the reason is just that we're not perfect. We're human. And they might really be our values, and we might really strive to live a life according to those values. And you know what? We're not angels. Sometimes we do things, we try, we're not perfect, we don't succeed in doing what we're trying to do. And that's part of the human experience. That struggle is why we're here. And ultimately, if we're not perfect, and if sometimes we behave in a way that doesn't align with what we report as being our values, all that means is that there's a good reason for us to get out of bed tomorrow. There's good reason for us to keep on living. Our life has purpose because there's growth we still need to make, and there's achievements, that we still need to achieve. So there's nothing wrong with that, and that's really not what I want to focus on in this conversation. What I want to focus on is a very different reason for, what a discrepancy that may show up, let's say, between the way we behave and the values we report, what we report as being our values. And sometimes what can happen is that there can be a serious gap, a real gap between our general behavior, the way we behave generally. I'm not talking about a specific action, a specific, behavior in a given moment. I'm talking about the way we live our lives generally. Sometimes there can be a very big gap between the way we live our lives and our general behavior and our values. And that doesn't, it doesn't come from us being dishonest about what our values are. It doesn't necessarily come from us, not trying or not wanting to live up to our values. There are some really important things that come into play in, creating this gap that can show up relatively frequently between our values and our behavior. And that's really what I want to focus on. And for a couple of reasons. Number one is, that's a much bigger issue than the fact that sometimes we're not perfect. And if we can address that, we can make a huge difference in our lives. And this is something that's really very important. And it's important not just in terms of our values and not just, from the idealistic perspective, but it's really important in terms of our quality of life and our well-being. Because if there's something, or if there are some things that we value highly, things that are important to us, and that's really what we believe that life's supposed to be about and what life is about and what we want our lives to be about, and we find ourselves consistently behaving in a way that, leaves a substantial amount to be desired as far as our values are concerned, that can over time lead to, real deficits in our well-being. It can leave us feeling drained. It can leave us feeling frustrated. It can leave us it can lead to self-loathing and resentment, and, it can chip away at our confidence and chip away at our self-respect, and it can lead to a whole host of things that are just really not good, let's say. So, because we all want to do the right thing. We all want to live a life according to our values. But, having a substantial gap between our values and the way we live life, at least in some parts of life. Again, I'd say that to varying degrees, it's a relatively common thing. If you haven't yet, click on the subscribe button, then click on the notification bell to see future videos. And please, again, share the link wherever you share things on social media, Facebook, wherever it is, WhatsApp groups, WhatsApp status, to help this message reach more people. This has been the Bites of Judaism podcast. This podcast has been made possible by Mr. and Mrs. David and Malki Smetana. If you found it valuable, please leave a 5-star rating and a review. It really does help it reach more people. And tell your friends about it. If you haven't yet, you can subscribe on all the major podcast platforms at rabbiglick.link/podcast. To dedicate a future episode of the podcast, send an email to podcast@rabbiglick.com. See you next time.